Love to hear a Bob White singing his song. See a big buck on a frosty dawn. Watch our kids catch their first bluegill. See them laugh and hear them squeal. We weren't born into it, but it fits us just right. We thank the Father for his guiding light. We knew we were blessed with this kind of living. That's why we want to keep on giving back to farm life. True North farm life. It's a great life. True North farm life.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the True North Farm Life podcast. I'm Chris Hinkle, and we got Thomas Cooper on the other line. Hey, Thomas, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Bob. How about yourself?
Good, good. It's September the 28th, and October is just around the corner. Fall is knocking.
It's right here, man. It's right around the corner, and to start us off real quick, I just want to run this by you. I know it's going to be hard for you to believe, but I actually jumped on the mower today and had to cut some grass.
You cutting grass?
Yeah.
Come on now.
Yeah, we finally, I think it broke 64 days, and good Lord blessed us with about just a touch over 3 inches of rain. So all is good in this part of the world, man.
You know why that happened, right?
I know exactly why. My neighbors have started living right.
No. I came to North Central Arkansas last weekend,
There you go.
and I brought it with me.
Yeah.
That's how it happened.
I should have had you down here earlier, it sounds like.
Yeah. No, we had a great time. We went fishing on the beautiful White River over there in your part of the country, and it's always a fun time to go over and catch a bunch of trout. And it was just, it was great to go over there. But no, I know certain parts of the area, actually trees over there were turning brown.
Yes.
I mean, there was some green, but there was a lot of brown. I mean, it looked like fall was happening, but I know it was just a lack of moisture.
Yeah, absolutely. What event brought you down there?
So we were there for the Arkansas State Awards banquet for the National Wild Turkey Federation, and we had roughly 100 people there. We were just honoring the chapters across the state of Arkansas that had wonderful banquets this year and giving out prizes and that kind of stuff. It's always a great time. We always meet there September time frame there on the White River, and just to get to meet and fellowship and just be around one another. It was great.
Awesome.
Yeah, we this week I actually have been pretty busy on social media. We've been challenged this week, and so I've been offering things to do, not things to do, but different topics kind of each day. But one of the things that I asked was, what was one of the topics that somebody would like to hear about, on our podcast? And that one of the topics was, how do I burn my property without burning my neighbors? Right? So that's a great question. Most of the times people that are wanting to do control burns are scared of it, and rightly so. I get it. And it is can be a very dangerous thing, right? If conditions aren't right and your fire lines aren't in. Thomas, what do you do in preparation for a fire? And I know it depends on the time of year, but most people are probably burning in the January to March time frame.
Right.
And kind of what are you doing to prep for that?
Yeah, so, we've talked about this before, and, prescribed fire is probably might be the cheapest and best tool that you can use as far as habitat management goes. Now, with that being said, it's a pretty steep learning curve, if you're not familiar with it. But with all that being said, I implement prescribed fire on my farm. I know you do as well. And it's just like anything else when it comes to, habitat management. It's a bite at a time and educating yourself. And, for private landowners here in the state of Arkansas, there are prescribed burn associations that are available to private landowners. And to be a part of a PBA, there's certain requirements and courses that you would have to take. There's learn to burn courses that an individual can take or a private landowner can take. And basically it's a 2-day course. You'll have a classroom session and then you will have essentially a field day where the forester will come out. There will be some private land biologists, and you'll conduct a controlled burn yourself. So with all that being said, before you ever start implementing prescribed fire on the farm, I think the process of educating yourself is, extremely beneficial. It's not like it used to be. My grandpa, he's 88 years old, and I can remember burning with him when I was younger, and it was essentially throwing a match late of evening and then coming back and looking at the damage the next day. And when I say damage, if it got out, it got out. And here's the deal with that. When everybody used to own 40 acres or something like that, there was no bush hogs, there wasn't a whole lot of herbicide usage. A lot of those folks burned their property off, and they burned it every year. But with that being said, as far as the legality of essentially going out and burning your property, there's some steps that you need to take in order to do that safely and make sure everybody is in the know and aware of what's going on. So, the first step in, burning a property is just having a burn plan. Your burn plan is essentially going to outline everything that you're going to do from start to finish on this particular portion of your property that you plan on burning. Now, with that being said, in your burn plan, you're going to have a checklist with weather conditions, fuel moisture, the type of fuel, fuel load, fire breaks that you put in place, personnel that you're going to have on the property. And excuse me, so to start, I would say 90 something percent of the burn itself is just the prep in general. We're going to use, we'll just use an example right now that I've got going on, and I've spoke about it a few times here on the podcast, and that is, I've got about 14 to 15 acres of a pollinator planting that I have to do on a wildlife incentive program here at the farm. And so, this planting in general, it's all open field. This is not going to be a timber burn, so it's a pretty fine fuel load. It's not super heavy. The fire breaks that I'm going to have implemented on this property, in certain areas, it's just going to be a mowed line. And what I mean by mowed line, it's going to be a bush hog line. Then I will come back with my mower and, bring the height of that fuel down even lower. The rule of thumb, you want your fire breaks at least 3 times the height of whatever you're burning. I've went in there this year.
You mean three times the width? You mean?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes,
Okay.
3 times
Yeah.
the width of whatever you're burning. Correct. I went in there earlier, early summer. Had to do a little bit of bush hogging, as bad as I hated to. I've treated the area with some herbicide to kill out some sericea and some blackberry, and so for the most part, it's pretty heavily grass based. It's a fine fuel load, but there's trouble areas within this burn that I have to pay closer attention to as far as my fire breaks. So I got it for an example. On the west side of this particular parcel, I've got I've got a landowner to the west of me that they haven't bush hogged, it hasn't been grazed, and on the other side of the fence, it's a lot of broom sedge, some fescue, and essentially, if it was to jump and it was to spot over, it could be a problem. So what I'm going to do there is I will take that fire break down to mineral soil. I'll come in with something heavy mechanical, whether it be just a dozer blade width, or in my part of the world, it's pretty rocky. I'd rather not try to drag a disc and disc it up. So what I did there is I'll bring a dozer in, take it down to mineral soil. The rest of it, though, it will be a mowed line, and I'll just get it down as short as I can. But that's the initial prep as far as the burn side goes. Now, with that being said, there's quite a few more factors that come into play with this specific piece of property because it's right off the highway. I mean, the entire south line, there's a quarter mile that butts up against the main
Yeah,
highway.
so you could have smoke going across that highway
Absolutely.
and be a visibility problem, right?
Absolutely.
That's
Smoke
right.
smoke management is, one of the key factors as far as like prescribed burn goes, because if you burn, if you happen to be burning somewhere that's closer to town and that smoke goes into a hospital, school setting, whatever it might be, that becomes an issue. Or in my case, being that I'm right up against the highway, I've got to have a south wind. If I don't have a south wind and the stuff starts crossing the road, that can turn into an issue in a hurry. Somebody might correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in the state, if you start a prescribed fire, you own that smoke for 3 days. So I've got to have a south wind there. You know, once I'm constantly monitoring the weather all the time. As you know, you don't burn when you have time to burn. You burn when the weather allows it.
Right. And
And
talk a little bit while you're on that subject
Mm-hmm.
of smoke. Talk a little bit about what kind of conditions encourage a lot of smoke to be like in the air on ground level,
Sure.
and what encourages the smoke to go up in the air.
Sure. You know, going back to this particular burn that we're talking about, when I'm looking at the weather, and I probably need to back up here. When I say I'm looking at the weather, I'm not looking necessarily at an app on my phone. I know there's AccuWeather, Weather Underground, whatever application you have on the phone to look at your weather. It'll give you some information, but it won't necessarily give you detailed information of that weather today. And you can get on any computer, tablet, phone, whatever it might be, and if you'll go to Google and type in NOAA, NOAA, fire weather forecast, it will bring you up to the actual website, and you can type in your zip code. And once you type in your zip code, it'll give you roughly the counties around you, and you find your county, and it'll give you the fire weather report for that day. And in that report, it'll give you the relative humidity, wind speed, mixing height, temperature, 20-foot wind speed. It gives you all that information. Go ahead.
And it'll actually probably do it by the hour.
Absolutely. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So if you know that the humidity is not going to be right for your burn until like 10 o'clock in the morning, your window is say from 10 o'clock till 2 o'clock. Right. So it gives you that window to where even if you start with something that's, let's just say, a high fuel load. So if you got a real high fuel load, you might want a little more humidity in the air when you start that fire than toward
Absolutely.
the end. Right. So it tells you which part of the property you need to start with on your burn. So let me just say this. There's a little bit more than an educated guess when it comes to burning. It's like Thomas said, it's all about a plan and executing a plan. And, when I look at burning my farm, just like what Thomas does his, I'm looking, a week ahead of time, and I'm kind of circling this day because I think the conditions are going to be right on this day. But as that day gets closer, the conditions may change, and it may be to where the conditions are not right that day, but the next day it changed to where the conditions are right the following day. So we then change our burn day till the next day, and I've had to do that a lot. I will say this, it's not very many times that I actually point out and say, listen, we're going to be able to burn next Thursday. That's when I want to burn. It's going to happen. Usually it's either Wednesday or Friday that it happens because the conditions do change. Just like weather reports, if I look at the 10 or 14-day forecast, right, it all gets pretty consistent. There's a 20% chance of rain. Highs are going to be in the upper 70s, which is what? Which is common for this time of the year. And that's what they do because they really don't know what it's going to do 10 to 14 days out. So they just go by the average and what that is. So, I would just say that as you get closer to that time, you're monitoring it. And I know when I wake up that morning, the day of the burn, I'm looking at an hourly forecast of what I'm going to get. And then, I'm out there with my crew. And, the crew is another thing that we can get into here. I've done it with a couple people, but I'm going to tell you, with two people, it doesn't matter what burn you do. There's always a I'm not saying a scary moment, but there's always a moment that during that fire that you're really hustling. Okay, you're really hustling to try to get it put out, or get it going the right way for you. The wind switches just a little bit, swirls, and it's burning on your back line a little bit. So, with two people, I would never really advise that. They've been really small burns that I've done with a couple people, mainly just food plots that were burning off, trying to replant some wheat or something like that there's not a lot of fuel on. But when you get into where you're burning grasslands, and like I have some wooded area that has a lot of viney stuff, right, that goes up 10 or 12 feet in the air. When you get into stuff like that, you can get into some stuff that is pretty it gets pretty crazy for a little bit. And so the scope of your burn also depends, how many people you're going to have on your crew to help you. I typically like 4 to 6 people on burns that I do. Now, if it was bigger than what I do, I would want more people, but 4 to 6 people really work out really well. Typically, you've got one person dragging the fire, you got 2, 3, 4 people with backpack blowers, and then you've got somebody that's manning the water truck, right, in case something gets out, and they'll be circling the burn line the whole time, just making sure the fire's contained in that. And is that similar to kind of what you do, Thomas?
Absolutely. It kind of goes back into your burn plan and making sure you have the right personnel. And, another thing that needs to be mentioned too is just a way to communicate with the people that are burning this piece of property with you. And, I know I've been on several burns, but the main line of communication is just CB or walkie-talkie or something like that, to where you can key in to somebody, that might be a quarter mile across a pasture or a block of timber or whatever it might be, because, how many times, regardless of where you're at, usually if you're involved in a prescribed burn, there's a lot of times where a cell phone doesn't do you any good. And to have the availability to key across and, get a hold of your line boss on whatever side of the property that he is and say, hey, listen, man, I'm going to slow it down on my side. I got a little bit of a wind switch, or, the wind might be picking up, and just to be able to relay that communication, because depending on if I'm setting a backfire and the wind starts picking up and I have to slow down to keep an eye on everything as a line boss and making sure my mop-up crew behind me is taking care of what they need to take care of, because on the other side of the property, you have somebody, essentially, depending on what type of fire you're burning the property with, you have somebody lighting a head fire on the complete opposite side. And sometimes if you don't have any means of communication, that guy that's lighting the head fire across the property, if he's 200 or 300 yards away and you don't have any communication and he's still walking down the line, guess what? You're not putting anything in the black on your side, and that can turn into a disaster real quick. So making sure that you have a good means of communication with everybody on the property, and having people that have done it before. Now, you can take a guy or gal that has never burned, and, have them a part of that burn and show them what's going on. But as far as, lighting a head fire or, blacking in something on one side or the other, the line boss there, he needs to know what he's doing. That way he can communicate effectively with the people on his side. He knows if he knows if he needs to slow down or if he needs to pick it up. There's been times to where we burned a piece of property when, essentially we had to light fire in order to slow something down. So, means of communication with everybody around you and having the right personnel in the right spots, it makes a huge difference.
Back to that communication part. For those of you that have not burned before, when you get involved in a fire, a prescribed fire, the noise that a fire makes, if it's let's just say chest tall grass, it will sound like a roar. Almost kind of like a train roar, that somebody 200 yards away, you can be screaming at the top of your lungs and they will not hear you. So keep that in mind. Also, we're running backpack blowers. when them things are running, you can't hear somebody for nothing, right? So, like Thomas said, a walkie-talkie that has the alert button on it, to where people can hear it. And then also that we use that person that's running the fire line with a water truck a lot for communication, right? He's circling. He just keeps circling. He just keeps circling the fire line and going around and checking on people and saying, fire's coming. Here's where it's at, blah, blah, blah. And then, if you have to communicate something that to get to them and they're not answering their whatever, you communicate through that person to say, hey, we're going to slow the fire down, or hey, when we get to the end of this point here, we're gonna run around here fast and light the head fire because we got a good back burn on here. So that person in the ones that I do acts as kind of a communication person as well. The other thing I want to talk about is on your fire lines, okay, your breaks. For me, my biggest thing that I've ran into has been dead trees right on my fire break. So, it might not, you look and you got a clean fire break, right? There's leaves all blowed off. It's bare dirt. You're like, hey, it's no way it's going to cross this line. And 90% of the time, there is no way it's going to cross that line unless you get a big wind or something like that. But what can happen is that if you got a dead tree that's on that fire line, and especially if it's hollow, okay? If it's dead and hollow, we call that stovepipes, right? Because that fire will get up in that tree and it'll burn, and it'll finally burn till it breaks that tree down. And it'll burn, and it'll fall over one of your fire lines, and boom, maybe after you've even left, right, that you've started a fire on the other side of the line, and you didn't even know it because you knew that all the fire when you left was out on the inside of the line, but what you didn't take into account was that tree that was on fire that fell 40 feet across the line, and now it just lit the other side on fire. So what I do is I make a round on all my fire breaks, and I'm looking at trees that if I thought would fall and even come close to the fire line, I'm just chopping them down before we ever get started. That way we don't have any incidents with trees falling. I had a 140-acre farm one time in McDonald County, and we burnt the whole thing. And it was great. It was 90% wooded, and we lit that puppy on fire. I had good fire lines all around it. Actually, I had like 4 or 5 different sections, and we burned it all in the sections. We didn't just go around and light the whole farm. We burned it all in these different sections. But there were so many hollow trees on that farm, and I can remember when we got done with the burn, it was into the night, and I probably spent 2 days trimming the trees around the edges that I thought were hollow. But inevitably, some of them that you didn't even think were bad or hollow, at night you can see everything. Like it looked like Christmas trees all across my farm. That was, and but every 2 or 3 minutes you'd hear just a big crash of a tree falling during the night because it was hollow. And it had dead, and it had caught on a tree, and it finally just fell to the ground. But you just got to watch out for that kind of stuff if you're burning in wooded areas for after the burn. And you never want to me, I never want to walk off and just leave. I don't want to see an ember when I get done with it. Not one anywhere. I'll give you an example. We were we did a prescribed fire on a buddy's farm, and here in Arkansas, I don't know, it was probably 4 or 5 years ago. And we burnt this particular section, and this section had a dozer brush pile that had been pushed up from years ago. And we said, we want to burn that brush pile because it's an eyesore, we want to get rid of it, everything's good. But the fire line was about 50 to 60 feet from that pile of brush, which we didn't think anything about it, right? Because it was contained. We, had it blacked in everywhere around it, and everything was good, right? But one thing we did not take into account, and I'll talk to you about this, is that look at the weather after your burn. Don't just look at it leading up to it, because what we didn't realize was there was a storm coming in. And the storm had what? High winds. And it was great for the burn. We didn't have high winds. We had the right conditions. But the high winds picked up after we left, a day after we left. Not that night, the next day after we left. And all of a sudden, my buddy was fortunate because he has several game cameras across his farm, and he got a picture of smoke on his game camera. And he knew right away that that was not right. It was not coming from the right direction. And so, boom, he ran out to his farm, and sure enough, from that brush pile, embers had blew from that brush pile 60, 80 feet away, and it had lit the neighbor's property on fire. We called the volunteer fire department. We got out there. We got it put out pretty quick. No, there was nothing harmed. But I just want to talk to everybody about precautions in burning, is that kind of stuff is real life stuff. The stuff that actually happens on burns, that you can't make it up. We didn't foresee it happening that way. But look at the forecast. If you've got potential of 30, 40 mile an hour winds the next day after your burn, and you've still got something on fire, a tree that's stovepiping, it can blow embers for a long way, not just a couple feet. It can be hundreds of feet that it can blow an ember. And if you're in really dry conditions, you can, like Libby said, you can light your neighbor on fire, literally. And we live in areas that are a lot more urban than what they used to be. Used to a lot of big farms, and like Thomas said, if fire was one thing that everybody used, and if it got over on the neighbors, it got over on the neighbors, no big deal. Most of them said thank you because you helped them out a little bit. But, in this case and the time that we live in now, a lot of people don't like that kind of stuff, and they get pretty wigged out about it. And for right reasons, right? I mean, we've had wildfires and it gets crazy. I know a buddy of mine in Kansas that got involved in a wildfire, and he had to take refuge in a pond. That's how bad it was, that he had to take refuge in a pond, that it was burning all around him. And the only thing that saved his life was that pond that he found in the smoke, all that stuff. It was a crazy story, but it just goes to show you the dangers in fire. But also, there's so many benefits with it, and I don't want to scare everybody away from it because, there's been a lot of good, safe fires that we both ran, Thomas. But it's our number one management tool that we use. But knowing the right conditions, and if you've not been to a burn class, I think it's very important to go to a burn class. And if you've not been to one, make sure you have somebody with you on your burn that has been to a burn class, or they've been involved in several classes. If you ask somebody, say, listen, are the conditions right? And they kind of look at you with a blank stare, don't trust them. Don't trust them. They need to be able to know, yeah, we've got a humidity of this, we got a wind speed of this. Today looks great. See, there's no clouds in the sky, so we're going to have good ventilation for our smoke. Or, you know what, we got all these low, thick clouds. This smoke is going to hang here. We're going to have a problem with this smoke going over this highway or in the city, or maybe my neighbor has breathing problems. And because my neighbor has breathing problems, they're going to call in to somebody, the police department, and say, hey, there's somebody got a fire out here and I can't breathe. And you know what? They will come out and shut you down. I promise you, they will shut you down for that. So smoke management, going back to that, is a big thing. And Thomas, are you prepping for anything right now?
Yeah, the only thing no pun, but the only thing that I'm prepping for right now is a growing season fire there on that particular piece of property that we've been talking about. To kind of touch on something that you you just got through talking about, there's this thing called due diligence when it comes to running a prescribed fire, and that starts from your burn plan. I'm talking about pre-burn, as far as your fire breaks, contacting your neighbors, making them aware that, hey man, I'm going to have a prescribed fire tomorrow. It's going to be 70 acres. Don't have any runaways. I've got the forestry on site. I've got game and fish on site. everything's squared away. If anything happens, I'll be the first one to reach out to you. Making people aware of that, what you're doing on your property is another big one too. When we, before I start any prescribed fire, I am calling local sheriff's department. I'm calling the forestry boys and letting them know what I've got going on. And not only am I telling them that I'm burning them, I called the forestry the last time we burned and said, look, man, I've got a 40-acre burn today. I let them know what type of fuel it was. I let them know how many people were on site. Hey, this is the time that I'm starting. This is the time that we're going to be starting the mop up afterwards, after we get through burning. Due diligence, making everybody aware of what's going on and what you're doing will save you and your neighbors a lot of stress and, taking time out of their day to stop and say, hey, what's going on? Do you need help? Whatever it might be. So, and that is part of a burn ban, actually notifying the neighbors around you and, the local authorities of what you're doing. Going back to your pre-burn and actually running your fire breaks and making sure that you don't have any ladder fuels. You were talking about you had some binding stuff there when you were burning off some timbers. Those ladder fuels that can go up and, essentially start a fire that's, 10, 20 foot up to cause embers to blow across the line. Or if you have a tree that's doty or hollow or whatever it might be, one recommendation that I would give people, if you're not super comfortable with, felling that tree and running a chainsaw, one thing you can do is you can take a leaf blower and just blow around that entire tree and remove that fuel load from that tree. And you haven't felled the tree, you don't have to worry about running a chainsaw. You can run fire through there as long as you have everything pulled back away from the tree, 2 to 3 foot. And you can do that. You don't have to have a leaf blower. You can take a council rake and pull all the debris back and do that. There's all different types of techniques that you can use in order to, mitigate fire risk and, having the chance of, having something jump across the line. Tyler Savage is our private land biologist here in my part of the state, and the class that I went to, he taught a portion of the class, and going back to communication and everybody talking and during a burn, he said, and I haven't forgot this, but he said one thing that in communication with everybody around the fire is, keeping a level head and staying calm during the fire. I know sometimes it can get out of hand and, you got to be on your toes. But, if you were to have something jump across the line, the first thing you're going to do is go, oh my gosh, and you think you need to get on that radio and key in and say, hey, we got a spot. Well, I got news for you. If you jump on that CB or that radio and say, guys, we got a spot on this west line, it's pretty similar to like saying saying bomb in the airport. Assess everything, jump across the line, take care of it. If you need help, then radio in. Prime example, we burn off 40 acres, fine fuel load. When I say it was, I think by the time we was wrapping it up, the RH was sitting around like 32 or something like that. And good mixing height, smoke was just up and out of there. And if you could see it from outer space essentially, but we got through with everything and we were doing the mop up and we got on the east side, and I look over on the east side and there's a burn patch that's about 6 foot in diameter. And I was like, slowed down real quick. And I thought, oh, what's going on here? And Tyler looked at me, he's like, oh, we had a spot over there. And that's all he said. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, we had a spot. I got out, took care of it. He never radioed in. He never said a word to anybody, because here's the deal. There's other people doing more, like not more important stuff, but doing very important stuff that are involved in the fire elsewhere. And you don't want to take the resources to something that you can take care of yourself, because guess what? If you pull everybody from the fire or from the burn and what they're doing to one spot, there's a good chance you're going to have trouble somewhere else. So I just thought I would mention that as far as, as far as the process of prescribed fire, burning a piece of property off. And you said it earlier, we're not mentioning this stuff to scare anybody. You know, you've got to have a certain level of respect for prescribed fire. But with all that being said, you know, the majority of this is your prep beforehand, checking the weather, making sure you have the right conditions, and then the mop up afterwards. I never realized, I didn't realize the importance of a mop up until like my first prescribed fire with a guy that has burned thousands of acres. He's in Tennessee now. He's a private lands biologist over there. And we burn off, it was me, Calvin Wakefield, and Daniel Greenfield. Both of them private land biologists, run a lot of fire, highly experienced guys. And we burned off 77 acres of timber. And brakes were good. Everything was in place. Weather was awesome. We wrapped this fire up in probably, I would say, 4.5 hours or something like that. We ran around, we mopped everything up, ran around it again, checked it again before we left. Before Calvin and Daniel left, Calvin said, "Hey, make one more trip around there, holler at me, and let me know let me know if you see anything." Well, I think it was uh, probably 3 or 4 hours later that night, because one thing Calvin asked me, he said, how far are you from the farm right here where we're doing this burn? I said, 10, 15 minutes. He said, okay, no big deal. He called me or texted me about 3 hours later. He said, run out there and check on stuff. And I thought, why? Why? We mopped it up. We went around it 3 or 4 times and went out there, made around, and you hit it on earlier. You learn a lot when it's dark. You learn a lot. There were a few trees on the inside. They were well inside of the black, but you look down in the timber and you see a 50-footer that's chimney, and you're like, you kind of get a little sketched out about it. So I called Calvin. He's like, well, how far is it? I told him. He said, and of course, going back to what you said, you're not just looking at the weather that day, you're looking at the weather the next 2 days. He said, everything should be squared away.
Yeah.
Woke up the next morning, had a text message, go out there and look at it, tell me what it looks like. So with that being said, all that being said, the fire should be the fun part. That prep and then the mop up afterwards, that's where you need to really do your due diligence, notifying everybody, mopping up, making sure everything's squared away when you get done. So, there's a lot to learn when it comes to prescribed fire, but the more you do it, the more experience you get, the more comfortable you get with it.
Right. And, one thing that we were talking about a little bit was fire breaks. And I want to go onto this just a little bit. So on one farm that I'd worked on before, a gentleman around his CRP field had planted about a 15-foot wide clover band all around the CRP field. So it served two purposes for him. One, the deer and turkey were in it all the time. They would travel the outside edge of that CRP and eat and walk and look, and it was just wonderful. And the second it served is that green clover acted as his fire line, right? So he had a natural maintained fire line that he had for years. He didn't really have to, he might mow it a couple of times a year just to keep it knocked down, but it served for him for two benefits. I always try to think about in terms of management and on my farm, right? So I think about this on certain places of my farm, like I might have a stand located on the south side of this field, and with a north wind, I can hunt the south side of this field and the deer will walk that line. Well, I might want to have that south line of that field in clover, but I might not want to do the whole property, the whole border in clover, because I want the deer funneling through the south side. So what would make them funnel through the south side more than the north side? Well, to me, that's food, right? If you got more nutritious food and they can be in cover and walk and eat, and at the same time, they're more likely to come down the south side of the field. So I think about them kind of things, when I'm looking at my property, and year after year, I'm trying to think, well, what else? I'm sitting there thinking, what else can I do to my property to make it just a little bit better? What else can I do to make the deer want to come to this area just a little bit more? And so over time, what you end up with is really quality locations that you've thought through and that you've little things that you've done to encourage the movement of that particular game through the area that you want them to go through. And the other benefit, right, it's worked right into your plan, your burn plan or whatever management plan practice that you've got going on your property. So think and look for ways on every property, ways that you can incorporate things into burn plans, into just different management strategies across your property. We're kind of at a time of the year right now where we're all thinking about deer season. I mean, September 28th, right? It's all the work, all the prep that we've done since really December of last year, and that's about how long it's been since we've been working on our farms, is since December, and now it's time to reap the benefits, so to speak. So, Thomas, I want to ask you one last question before we kind of wrap this up. You're going to do a growing season burn. Are the conditions, do you look for different conditions for a growing season burn than you do a dormant season burn? And what, if you had to pick the perfect conditions, what would that look like?
So to touch on the first question you asked me, the conditions on a growing season burn, they're going to be a little bit different than obviously a dormant season burn. A growing season burn can start in April till, I would say October. You can run a growing season burn and then, and here's the deal. Had we not had this drought here in my part of the world, I would have tried to already knock this thing out. But we'd been under a burn ban for so long, and you could have definitely gotten something to burn, but growing season burns, you generally see a lot more smoke. There's a lot more water available in that, and whatever you, give me 1 second, Chris. I was talking about, growing season burns, generally there's a lot more smoke. You're going to be babysitting that fire a little bit because here's the deal. The fuel's not going to be dry. You really honestly have to have a little bit drier conditions. The relative humidity has, you want it a little bit lower than what you normally can. But, in the summer, you're not going to be able to get to that 30% humidity. Majority of the time, you're not going to be able to get there. And, with growing season burns, they're usually a little bit more patchy. You don't really just smoke everything, as they say. It's not going to look like a Walmart parking lot after you get through with a growing season burn. But with all that being said, a growing season burn, I'm not necessarily using a growing season burn to essentially just have scorched earth. It's a prescribed fire. It's a prescription for a reason. And it might be to take out some of the woody growth there, whether it be persimmons, blackberry, or whatever it might be. And you have to have a little bit different weather conditions for growing season burns. And smoke management is a little bit more crucial there because smoke tends to hang around a little bit longer. Everybody sees it in the summer when it's hot and you wake up in the morning and that fog's sitting on top of the ground. Sometimes your burns might be a little bit later in the day in order to get that up and out of there. So with that being said, as far as weather conditions for a growing season fire, I want the relative humidity as low as I can get it. And, I want bluebird skies to get that mixing high to get the smoke up and out of there. And, I need a little bit more wind to push that fire through.
When you say a little bit, what are you talking about?
When I say a little bit more wind, if you're sitting there and if it's 5 and under, you'll be there all day. in a growing season fire. You'll just, and everybody's seen that fire where it just creeps and smolders and creeps and smolders. You can get away with a little bit more wind with a growing season fire. You can get it, jump it up there 10, 15 miles an hour to push it through that fuel, because essentially in the growing season, that fuel, it's holding a lot of moisture. Now, if it's in February when everything's senesced and it's dry, totally different ball game. You know, you want to keep it down there between that. You know, I like that 6 to 12-ish, depending. If I'm in the timber, you can get away with a little bit more wind.
How about your humidity in the dormant season?
You know, so if I'm just running if I'm going to run a back and fire and I'm going to black in my line where my headwind's pushing to, I want to start that fire. Well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run a test fire. I'm going to take that drip torch and I'm going to touch it on a corner, and I'm going to back up and see what happens.
And which
You know,
corner? Which corner are you going to touch it on?
Okay, so you know, here's a good example. Going back to the property we've been talking about, this is a block 40. On the north side is the furthest side away from the highway. South side is right up against the main highway. I'm going to black out because I'm going to burn this property with a south wind. My black line is going to be on the north side of my property.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to go to that north side, and you know, if it's got a little east or west, that's going to depend on where I'm going to start the fire. You know, but I'll pick my corner depending on the wind that day on the north side. Drop that drip torch there, and I'm going to check and see what's going on, see how it reacts, see how quick it's burning. Check my smoke, make sure it's going up and out of there. So dormant season fire, I'm starting my black. When I say I'm starting my black, I'm blacking out the backside of my fire line when the humidity is the highest. You don't want to start blacking out that side when the humidity is already dropping, because there's a good chance it's going to, not a good chance, but there is a chance that it's going to get away from you.
Yeah.
I would much rather start that black and babysit that while the humidity is high and get me 20, 30 foot of it. And then guess what? When the humidity is down where it's low and that fire is really taking off, well, guess what? I've already got that line blacked out. I've got a huge buffer to protect me and the landowner on the other side of me.
Yeah, just like Thomas said, you know, where I'm starting on my farm, I'm mainly doing dormant season fires, but I'm starting with the rankest area that I've got stuff that's head tall that I know is going to be a ferocious fire, right? So I know I've got a ton of fuel there. So that's going to be where I start my fire with the highest humidity. And I like to start around the 60% humidity. That's kind of, if I'm looking at my hourly and I see it's 80% at 6 a.m. and at 9 a.m. it's 70%, and at 10 a.m. it's 60%. I'm probably going to start my fire around 10 a.m. is when I'm going to start my fire. But I'm also watching that back end, because that back end might be as low as in the 20-something percentile by the time I'm done. And I know that time frame is 3 o'clock. So I know that I have from now until 2:30 to burn on my property, and I'm starting with the heaviest fuel loads, and I'm going down to the lowest fuel loads right at the end, because the lowest fuel loads is where I'm not as concerned about it, because there's just not as much fuel there, and it's not going to burn as fast, as quick, and have the potential to get away from me. So picking the property that you want to burn. If you're burning woods, you know, woods are fairly easy, but if you're burning in woods that have a lot of topography, when you get some of them updrafts coming up them hills from them valleys, it can move really fast through timber. So that's another thing that you got to kind of watch is, you know, where you light your fires, how it reacts to that. Make sure you got the good burn lines in. It's just a different thing in timber. A backpack blower is your friend. I had areas that were dozed, so I had natural roads in my property, but still you had leaves that went over on them, right? So what I did is I would go with my zero turn mower put my deck height as high as it would go, and I would blow all the leaves to the side that I was starting the fire on. I didn't blow them to my other side that I wasn't going to burn on, because why would you want to put all the fuel across the road, right? You know, I want to put all the fuel into the area that I'm burning. So I would blow all the leaves over to that side of it, and then after I blew all them off, there was still a few. I'd go back with a backpack blower, but it made really quick work of, you know, miles of burn lines that I could run fairly quickly with a zero turn and get all of it straight. But there are times that you're going to be running a fire through a forest that you don't have any roads, and a backpack blower is going to be your friend. It really will. But yeah, Thomas, is there anything else that you want to touch on, buddy, about fire? I know we can't cover it all in a 45 to 50 minute time frame, but I think we've done a pretty good job of it today. Is there anything else?
Yeah, I think you kind of touched on. I feel like we've been all over the place, but we have touched on the majority of, what it takes to conduct a prescribed fire on a piece of property. If anybody has any questions, obviously leave them in the comments. We don't care to touch on them and help you out as much as we can. I think what I'd leave everybody with is just educate yourself as much as possible. Sign up for those Learn to Burn classes, and the more that you're involved in prescribed fire, the more comfortable you'll be, and the more you'll educate yourself and familiarize with the process.
Right. I put a picture on social media this week, and it was of a couple fields on my property that had all these different wildflowers popping up on it, and it's so cool to see. Like, I've even thought of my kids, like, getting their senior pictures made at the farm, in that. But really, I'm going to say from sometime in late April to early May till July, it's like a different color every week, and it is so cool to see. And all the wildlife that kind of flock to that is so cool to see. The butterflies and the bees and all the different things that benefit from native vegetation is really endless. Not to mention, of course, our deer and our turkeys and all that stuff. But hey, listen, we appreciate you guys joining us this week. The True North team here at Keller Williams, we're always looking to help you in any way that we can. If we can help you buy or sell a piece of property that you've been looking for your favorite place, we'd love to help you with that. Or if you just like to call us and talk to us about better management practices on your farm, just give us a call. We'd be happy to answer any questions. I'm Chris Hinkle. We've got
Thomas
Cooper right there, and we look forward to seeing and working with each and every one of you. Thank you again.
Take care.
Bye.
We get up early and we stay till late. To get it all done, we work from can to can't. The weather might be our friend or our foe. It does what it does, rain, sleet, or snow. That's farm life. True North farm life. Tractor won't start, the sprayer won't spray. It's too wet to plant the beans anyway. We'll figure it out and make a new plan, so we can get it done as soon as we can. That's farm life. True North farm life. We love to hear a Bob White singing his song. See a big buck on a frosty dawn. Watch our kids catch a first bluegill. See them laugh and hear them squeal. We weren't born into it, but it fits us just right. We thank the Father for his guiding light. We know we're blessed with this kind of living. That's why we want to keep on giving back to farm life. True North farm life. It's a great life. True North farm life.